What is going on, Pretender here, back with another Honkai Starro video, and today I'm here with my final impressions of Anaxa. Ever since his release, I've practically been doing nothing but using him on every single team, on any single half. I've used him so much, and I've also used him at every level. Tested him a bunch at E0S0, E0S1, E1S1, E2S1, and E6S1, and technically E6S2. And so today I'm finally here with my final impressions of what I do think about him. So all I want to say before I get into the video, if you guys found this video helpful and enjoyable in any way, shape, or form, dropping a like would be greatly appreciated. If you're new, haven't done so already, be sure to subscribe and turn the bell for future videos like this, along with all other types of Starro content, and let's get straight into it. So first, kind of recounting like what I said in my first impressions. During my first impressions, you know, practically a day or 2 or 3 after he did release, I was very impressed with his performance at every single level. You know, he was performing great at early dupes, at no dupes at that. Just having him, his signature Lycone, he did so good and consistent damage, especially with how much output you were able to get. With the whole thing of implanting 5 weaknesses and getting 2 whole skills out. Especially when you ran him as a hyper carry, you know, where he had some big access to some of the best supports in the game. You know, Tribi, especially with her E1, Robin buffs, especially to fix his deprived attacks that. And then also stuff like Sunday. Running him with a -1 build, allowing you to get 4 skills per turn pretty much is actually insane. Because you get the 2 from his actual turn, and then at Sunday's turn, you give Anaxa another turn, and you get 2 more skills, practically guaranteeing 1 to 2 ults in those rotations as well. The damage output at just every single level was absolutely insane. But then when it comes to him in the story, you know, in 3.0, we unfortunately got nothing, and in 3.1, he was just kind of like mentioned, I'm pretty sure. But you know, we finally got the 3.2 patch. Everything was practically just about him and his whole thing. He didn't last too long, but you know, every time he was on the screen, he was just a absolute mad lad. He was so goddamn raw. And at the very end, which, you know, spoiler, 3, 2, 1, when he rips out the core flame and then just slowly disappears while being a maniac and just laughing, I was like, this character sold it. It is what it is. He's so goddamn cool, and I was so glad that they actually did cook on his character. They also gave him the perfect JPVA. I honestly can't really think of anyone better for his JPVA specifically, so everything when it came to, you know, his character, personality, story, all that stuff, they cooked so hard, and I'm so glad for that. I did also talk about that in my first impressions video. I was kind of scared if they maybe didn't make him to where I liked him too much, but they did end up cooking really hard, and I really like him. He is my second favorite character now, right behind Aventurine. Well, not right behind, because I do like Aventurine significantly more, but he still is my second favorite character in the game. Which, beating out Welt and Luocha at the number 2 spot is actually really hard, so the fact he was able to do that is a great achievement for me on its own. But yeah, going back to talking about his kit wise, so again, testing him at every single level. When I did test him at E0S0, the only problem I really had was the whole 2-turn ultimate thing. It's not really as much of an issue as I did think previously. It was a little annoying, and it was annoying to not have all the weaknesses on the enemies to get, you know, the full effect, doing more damage to them, having the actual weaknesses on them for anyone on their team, and then obviously having 5 so you can get the double skill. If you ran him as a sub-DPS, it's a lot more apparent if you don't have a signature Lycone for that 2-turn ultimate. Because obviously you're not giving him like an action forward and such, so it's a lot more difficult, and you don't have someone like Quopo to help you with that on the team maybe. Then it becomes a little annoying because you can't really give him another turn to let him skill again to actually get the full weakness effects. Because if you are running him as a hyper carry at E0S0, he's able to use skills so many times, so you just implant the weaknesses all together. And if you are running him as a hyper carry, usually you do pair him with someone like Sunday, and Sunday can not only give energy but, you know, the full turn, as opposed to running someone like Sparkle. Which Sparkle, I actually use it a lot with Anaxa. Base speed Anaxa does work really well. It makes his damage really good. Only bad thing is it sort of dilutes crit damage, just because Anaxa gives himself 140%, plus, you know, the base rolls you already have, and then Sparkle buff is significantly higher for crit damage, so it does get diluted, but she still is really good with him. But of course, -1 speed always being better is the case of I just like using Sunday more. I don't like using Bronia too much with Anaxa because you always want to spam skill with Anaxa. I get you can use basic attack and still proc the second skill. I much rather just spam skill as much, so that's why I don't really like using Bronia too much. But yeah, E0S0 as a hyper carry, completely fine. That whole 2-turn ultimate thing is really not an issue. As a sub-DPS, you know, specifically with someone like the Herda, then it is a lot more apparent because you can't just have the weaknesses on them at all times. But even then, if you don't have the weaknesses, his damage is still really solid as a sub-DPS at E0S0. If you are looking to pull him at E0S0, mainly for the sub-DPS, and you already have characters, you know, like Jade for like the Herda specifically, because I don't really see another team where you'd pull him E0S0, I would really just recommend just using whatever else you have, because he still is an upgrade in practically every scenario, but I don't think it's worth the pulls and potentially losing. At E0S0 with his performance with the Herda, it's still good, but I definitely don't think it's something worth chasing. When you do get his S1 and you do gain access to those turn 2 ultimates and even more damage, you know, him giving defense shred as well, increasing his damage and giving him a big damage dealt increase as well, then it's significantly better just because now his damage is way higher. You have defense shred making him and your team do even more damage. On top of that, actually giving him access to that 2-turn ultimate does significantly increase his value. His light cone is a very, very nice jump. Increases his damage significantly as a sub DPS and main DPS, but also, you know, mainly for sub DPS, gives him access to 2-turn ultimates without RNG or any other forms of energy, which is why it's actually really good. If you're able to get the S1, it's a big noticeable jump. I personally really don't like running him with the Herda because I think Anaxa just has so much potential as a hyper carry. I just feel like it's wasted to run him as a sub DPS. I'm not saying it's bad. He still is the best option, but he's just so goddamn strong as a hyper carry. I much rather in every case, even if I had the Herda, obviously I've tested the Herda enough to know my opinions, but if I had the Herda on my account, I would never really run Anaxa as a sub DPS for her, just because I'd rather just run him as a main DPS, even if I didn't have E6 on my own personal Anaxa. If he was, you know, lower dupe or no dupe, I much rather just run him as a hyper carry, and I would just stick to running someone like Jade with the Herda instead, just because I feel like he has much more value as a hyper carry character. But then when we do take a look at his early dupes, you know, his E1 is really not that special. Gives you a skill point back on your first skill usage, and once the skill does hit everyone, you lower their defense by 16% for 2 turns. This dupe becomes a lot more valuable if you are running other sources of defense shred, defense ignore and such, which he himself does have defense ignore. His light cone gives defense shred, but you only really will notice the difference if you are running him as a hyper carry and you have other things like Sunday E1, and then again you have Anaxa's E1 paired with his S1, you're running the Genius set, you have the full weaknesses for his actual bonus trace for the defense ignore. If you have all that added up, then you definitely can feel it. But as a sub DPS where there's really not many sources of defense ignore or defense shred that you're getting for him specifically, because you're not buffing him specifically and the teammates usually don't have it either, it's not really that noticeable. Definitely not really that good of a dupe on its own regardless. Again, as a hyper carry, it's noticeable, but I still don't think it's as strong as it should be, you know, especially with the E1s and E2s we have now. I think it definitely could have been a lot stronger. So testing him from E0 S1 to E1 S1, it really wasn't much of a difference. I'm not really going to talk about dupe and then S0 just because there is no point in getting a dupe over his S1. They practically never will outperform his S1. His S1 is always going to be better to get. If you go for a dupe before actually getting his Lycone, then you messed up. Unless you got really lucky and got a 2-in-1, so you have an E1 S0, then that's different. But yeah, so I'm going to talk about the dupes with his S1. When it comes to his E2 on the other hand, I think this E2 is a lot better than I thought. The only little annoying thing is this actually does allow you to get a instant second skill proc because it has someone on the field have 5 weaknesses, so you can instantly get both. My only issue is if you're running a multi-wave thing, you know, his technique implants a weakness and then the help of the E2. Once the next wave comes in, the E2 does proc, but his technique doesn't proc. I wish there was a way to have it where the actual second wave comes in and they also can get it, just so you can always have that instant actual second skill proc. I think if there was a way to make the E2 kind of do that, that would be a lot better, but it would have to be relatively specific. You know, it's more of a technique change rather than his actual E2 change. E2 on its own, again, really good, allows you for that second skill right away, and on top of that, lowers everyone's all-type res by 20%. So he's going to be doing a lot more damage, and he also helps your team do a lot more damage. So, you know, DPS with the Tribi, sub-DPS potential. If you're Anaxa's E2 and you're still running him with the Herda, you'll feel it with the Herda's damage as well. It's actually really, really nice. Originally, I thought it wasn't going to be that good, but, you know, now that I've tested it a lot, it's definitely very, very nice. E4, I'm not going to really talk about this specifically. I only really tested it for like 1 or 2 runs. It's just a big attack increase. It does help him with his deprived attack stat, but you still want to run something like Robin because even with this, it's still better to run something like an attack orb. It is nice and noticeable, but it's, you know, still kind of whatever. And then his E6. Okay, so his E6 is something I thought wasn't going to be that crazy. You know, it's a big increase to original damage, taking you from 100% of the original damage to 130%. You know, we know how that usually is. Doing damage higher than the original damage is almost crazy. But honestly, Anaxa already killed a lot of things at, like, you know, E2 and such and lower. So often you probably wouldn't even feel this, but I've had times where I have felt it, and it's actually just insane. Not only are you doing 130% of the original damage, but now you're actually getting the full effect of his actual erudition trace. So instead of having one giving himself 140 crit damage or the other giving everyone 50% damage out, he just gets both. So not only are you now getting 140% crit damage at the same time giving himself and the team 50% damage out, is just really good because now your team is still going to do more damage, and on top of that, Anaxa will do even more damage just because he also has an extra 50% damage dealt. So that E6, if he already wasn't shredding everything at low dupes, at E6 he practically is just Control-Alt-Delete. If something does live his first skill, the second skill just absolutely shreds them. I've had times where I killed a boss at lower HP with his skill, and then so the second skill gets transferred to the second HP bar, the second skill goes off and deletes the bar in one hit. Anaxa's potential as a single target DPS is also just absolutely absurd at every level. You know, the whole thing being bounce. Bounce can be a bit annoying in full AoE scenarios, so in pure fiction, but it's still really strong. But my god, if it is just one enemy, they just get deleted. It's actually insane how fast you can delete people with Anaxa. I'm pretty sure he really is just the best single target DPS in the game right now, just because of the amount of damage you can do with the double skill. And then if you have the E6, the damage you get is just guaranteed control alt delete. So in MLC, he just shreds through everything. If there's 5 enemies, if there's 3 enemies, if there's 1 enemy with the 1 boss, he just absolutely destroys them. It's actually insane how much damage he does at every single dupe level. Early dupe level, perfect unit. E0 S1, he becomes perfect. E0 S0, little less so, still really good. As a sub DPS, E0 S0, little whatever, but still really good. But then once you get his S1, that practically just fixes all the issues you'd have. Early dupes, not that crazy. E2, really good, but you know, something you probably wouldn't really push for unless you really did like them, and they are noticeable. E1 less so, E2 very good. E4 mainly just a stepping stone for E6, and then E6, if you weren't already deleting everything, you'll delete it 5 times over. In MLC, again, he just shreds everything. In pure fiction, he actually performs way better than I thought he would. As I mentioned, the bounce skill can get a bit annoying if you don't hit the target you want enough, but he does so much damage to the point it really doesn't matter. And then in Apocalyptic Shadow, oh my god. You pair him with Ruan Mei, and not only is he doing good toughness damage, but he's also implanting so your team can also just do everything. And you're able to break these bosses faster to kill them faster. The amount of damage and the break potential he does have in Apocalyptic Shadow is just absolutely absurd. And then briefly talking about mainly Divergent Universe, because, you know, I said Simulated Universe in the beginning, but I meant Divergent Universe. He is just so broken in there. At every single dupe level, he is just absolutely broken. I love this specific setup where if you do get 2 of the 3-star, I think it's 3-star, I forgot what rarities were, the gold hunt buffs where you get a extra turn if you kill, and also the one you get an extra turn if you break. And then, you know, obviously getting your regular attack buffs, your damage ups, all that stuff, your regular supports, you know, weakness break efficiency especially. You literally just have unlimited Anaxa works. He doesn't stop skilling. You get skill, free skill, skill, free skill, and then you kill or you break at the same time, and you just get turn after turn after turn after turn. If you guys have Anaxa and you guys have not tried him hypercarry in Divergent Universe, 100% recommend it. Aim for whatever setups you like going for your generic DPSs, but try to get the hunt buff that gives you an extra turn for killing an enemy and also an extra turn for breaking an enemy. If you get that, your life will change, I promise you. It's actually insane. Anaxa was also the reason I finally maxed out the difficulty, which is really ironic because when Feixiao came out and she was the win DPS, she was the reason I finally did the max difficulty Divergent Universe. And now Anaxa being the other win DPS is the reason I did it again. So really ironic, really fun unit, just insane in all modes. I honestly think the people that really regard him as being just a herd support and just a sub DPS are just completely sleeping on his potential. I genuinely think you guys are undervaluing him way too much. His potential as a main DPS is just so strong, but I still see people just regard him as the herd support and also just a sub DPS. If you run him as a hyper carry, I promise you, your life will change. His damage is absurd, his output is absurd, being able to implant every weakness is absurd. The fact he works with practically every single best buffer in the game is also absurd. Even if you have him at not much investment, you know, either S0 hyper carry is really good. If you have the S1 at minimum, it's really good. He just has so much potential, so if you are someone that regards him as just a sub DPS or just the herd support or slave, I just recommend taking him, using him as a hyper carry. It will be so good. Obviously, hopefully your build is good enough to warrant that though. But yeah, as you guys can tell, my final impressions, this is probably and is the most fun I've had on the game. Anaxa is my favorite unit by far. Again, I said Aventurine is my favorite character by far still, but I think Anaxa usage-wise is far and not my favorite. At every single level, E0 S0, E0 S1, E1 S1, E2 S1, E4 S1, technically, and then E6 S1, and then, you know, mine at E6 S2 now. He has just been cooking at every single level, never disappointed me. The only time I feel where it's kind of whatever is just E0 S0 as a sub DPS. That is where it's like still good, but you know, not really anything to blow me out of the water. But once you get his S1, it's a different game. I just think he is such a good unit at early investment, and is definitely something you should worth considering, especially if you are in the cases where you do want another hyper carry. He is just so good at that. And as a sub DPS, his power is still really strong. But do not just regard him as a sub DPS. He is so much more than that. But yeah, that is my final impressions of Anaxa. As you guys can tell, very satisfied. Very much like this character. I'm so glad they did him justice with how they made him. I was a bit scared of the last second nerfs, but he still is absolutely insane. If you guys also went for Anaxa and you guys use him hyper carry, let me know how you guys are enjoying him as well. Are you guys enjoying him as much as me? You know, what level of investment you got him to, and so on. That's all I want to say. Peace out.